Lloyd Austin was former Commander General of CENTCOM, 4-star General, Pete Hegseth, Fox News host.
Yes, very different resumes.
Very different resumes.
Decorated military.
Very different resumes.
Decorated
there is
military
no one. There
Can you
is,
not acknowledge that the man served?
The man served. Yes, the man served. He
highly decorated.
Not in combat.
Not in combat.
Hegseth?
He wasn't in combat.
Iraq and Afghanistan.
I mean, the man served our country.
And he, I think, had a Bronze Star for his
But
service.
my point.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at is a panelist that CNN brought onto the show that had no idea what he was talking about. He came on peddling a whole bunch of lies about Pete Hegseth to make the guy look bad. His name is Bakari Sellers. It got so bad where Scott Jennings literally had to humiliate him for being incompetent. And as you can see, he started out claiming that Pete Hegseth did not serve in the military, that he did not serve in combat, and that he's not qualified to lead the Department of Defense. But Scott Jennings and the other panelists had to correct him to let him know that not only did Pete Hegseth serve in combat, but he also received a Bronze Star. But after being humiliated about that false claim, he immediately pivoted to try to paint Pete Hegseth as being incompetent. Take a look at this.
I mean, the man served our country.
And he, I think, had a Bronze Star for his
But
service.
my point that I want to get back to is that there is a level of competence that the American public is thirsting for that they are not getting from Pete Hegseth. And we're seeing that. When he is up there...
And transparency.
Transparency. That's all we want. We're talking about 160 children that were killed. All we want is an honest answer that comes from you and the President of the United States. This isn't politics. This isn't Lindsey Graham versus Cory Booker. This is just tell us what we're doing, because we have 7 soldiers, as Abby corrected me last segment. We have 7 soldiers who've died. We have 160 children who've died. We understand that this is the fog of war. However, we want a level of competence from Pete Hegseth that we're not getting.
So before we continue, there's 2 things that I want to outline with this guy Bakari Sellers. For one, you're claiming about competence when you can't even get the guy's name right. He knew he was coming on CNN. He couldn't bother to pick up Pete Hegseth's bio and read it. The second thing, he wants the Secretary of War to come out and state that the bombing of the school in Iran, that we did or did not do it, which is foolish because you never do that whenever there's an ongoing investigation. And here's Scott Jennings literally humiliating this guy again. Take a look at this.
However, we want a level of competence from Pete Hegseth that we're not getting.
I do think that we are
What
going
is
to know.
incompetent about this military operation, in your opinion, in your expert opinion?
I don't. First of all, I never served, and let me
You're
start
quick
by
to say
saying
this
that.
is incompetent. I
No,
want to know what's
no,
incompetent.
No. I think Pete Hegseth is incompetent.
Why?
I think
What's happening?
Because he has an inability to tell the truth.
What did he say? What did he say that was false?
Because we know what happened.
No, we don't. They're investigating.
Well, I mean, look, there is.
Wait a minute,
I think, hold on.
No.
Hold on.
I want all of you all to go out on a limb right now and tell me that the United States, even during the fog of war, did not kill those kids. Tell me they didn't.
I don't know. They're investigating it, and I'm willing to abide by the results.
I do think,
as she said, that's the right answer.
It is.
My question is, who's responsible for bringing these people onto CNN? Because it really doesn't make sense, because clearly this guy has no idea what he's talking about. And he himself admitted that he did not serve in the military, that he's no expert. Then why is he qualified to sit there on national television trying to give expert opinion? This is the reason why people don't watch mainstream media anymore. And thank God Scott Jennings was actually on the show to give a little bit of pushback. Because what he wants, this guy, Bakari Seller, whatever his name is, what he wants is for the Secretary of War to come out and say we did not cause that attack on that school, or come out and confirm that we did when there is an ongoing investigation. Because I served in the military and I know how these things work. Because if there's a firing incident or an instance where you target the wrong target, then it's going to take a while for the military to do an investigation. It's going to take anywhere from 3 days to a couple of weeks. Because what CNN wants is for the Secretary of War to come out and confirm or deny that we targeted the school. Which in any situation, you never want to do that. Let the investigation play out. And here we have Scott Jennings actually educating this guy, letting him know that this is exactly how these things work. Take a look.
Important thing Hegseth said, and all Americans need to know and understand this. The difference between us and the enemy, we do not target civilians. When it happens, and it will happen in war, it is tragic and it is not meant to be. The enemy targets civilians. They hide behind civilians. They fund people who set up bases in hospitals so that civilians are in the way. That's not what we do. An investigation needs to occur. All the truth needs to be told. And we will give transparency to the American people. But there's two parts of this war, our part and the enemy. The enemy targets civilians. Look what they're doing all over the region, firing missiles intermittently.
So I just love how Scott Jennings actually educated this guy and the rest of the panel. And he had nothing to say. He just sat there and nodded his head because there's nothing else to say. Because he knew he was misinformed. He came on the panel spilling a whole bunch of lies. Because what they want is to create the narrative that the United States military is targeting civilians, when that is not the case. And this military operation has been vastly successful. So there's nothing to talk about. So they're just fishing for stories. And here we have Pete Hegseth actually setting the record straight. Take a look.
No nation in the history of warfare has ever attempted in every way possible to avoid civilian casualties. And frankly, that's a point that just isn't appreciated enough. We take things very, very seriously and investigate them thoroughly, which takes time, and which is why it does take time. But ultimately, unlike Iran, who targets civilians indiscriminately, who we've seen in the intel moving rocket launchers into civilian neighborhoods, near schools, near hospitals, to try to prevent our ability to strike. That's how they operate. And then they set the targeting of drones and missiles toward civilian targets, hospitals, hotels, airports. CENTCOM's been very good about putting that information out. That's how terrorist regimes fight. They target civilians. We do not. And I can tell you this administration and this Pentagon focuses on that very, very closely.
So the Secretary of War brought up a great point. Iran is actively targeting civilians, and this is something that CNN isn't talking about. They're talking about the military, the United States military, targeting civilians when that is not the case. Sure, there are always collaterals. Civilians are always going to die in war. But the United States military is one of the only militaries in the world that actively try to avoid targeting civilians. You cannot say the same about Iran. You cannot say the same about Russia. You cannot say the same about all these different countries. And as I said, I served in the military for 10 years. And the training that we go through to make sure we're not targeting civilians is a lot. And after that narrative on CNN fell apart, on that panel fell apart, that the United States military is trying to target civilians, what they pivot to is to say that the administration doesn't have a strategy in Iran. Take a look at Scott Jennings debunking this narrative as well. Play clip.
Well, I mean, what does he want them to do? He wants them to not have nuclear weapons. He wants them to not have a ballistic missile program. He wants them to not have an aggressive Navy, and he wants them to not be an exporter of terrorism around the world. Now, whatever happens to the next regime, I don't know, but I know this. We will not permit them to do any of those things. The nuclear piece, to me, is the most important. You cannot have a nuclear-armed Iran. They showed up at the negotiations with Witkoff and said, oh, well, we've got enough material to make 11 nuclear weapons. Well, I think having them described as ultimately being compliant or someone you can work with, I don't think that's the vector. What you have to understand about these people is that they're fanatics. They would like to bring about the end of the world by causing a nuclear war that brings in, the religious piece of this for them. So they're not going to ever be compliant about that. They have this worldview. We have to take away their capacity to enact that worldview, which is, to me, why the nuclear piece is a vital issue. You cannot have them sitting out there with any material.
For now.
My question is, what's the purpose of CNN if they're not going to report the news or report things accurately? Because we know the administration outlined what they're going to achieve in Iran. For one, they stated Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. 2, they will degrade Iran's missile capabilities. 3, Iran will not be an exporter of terrorism. And 4, they will destroy Iran's navy, so they won't be able to impede the Strait of Hormuz. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it too much. And what we know is that Iran's navy has been destroyed. Their missile capabilities is severely degraded. Their nuclear capability is basically non-existent at this point because the military bombed it into oblivion. And now what the administration and the Department of Defense is working on, or the Department of War, is to degrade the regime's ability to export terrorism. And that brings us to the end of today's show. Please let me know in the comment section what you think. Also, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you.